So good morning, everybody, and welcome. My name is Chris, and I am the creative lead here at Mobile Live. But for the next hour and a bit, I also get the pleasure of being your moderator for How Design Thinking Turns Chaos to Clarity, Getting Your MVP to Market Fast. We have a lot of great content to cover here today. However, what I think is equally important to what we are going to show you is why we are going to show it to you. Recent events have shown us all just how quickly the world can turn from chaos or can slip into chaos and confusion. But that chaos isn't limited to a global pandemic. It happens in varying degrees in our day-to-day lives. However, despite the chaos, whether global or professional, a business must keep moving forward. Customers still have problems that need to be solved, and your ideas still have the potential to solve them. That is, if you can take them from concept to fruition. So it is our hope that when today is done, you will be a little bit more informed and ideally a little better equipped with some new tools, some new frameworks, and some new ideas that can help you go from chaos to clarity, get your ideas from abstract to concrete, and to get your MVP where it belongs, in the hands of your users. Now, one last thing before we get started. We received quite a few questions for our presenter, Uzair, today. I am sorry, Uzair, I apologize in advance. So rather than having the typical Q&A at the end, we're actually going to have two Q&A sessions today. So again, I encourage all of you to, as your questions arise, to please utilize the Q&A function and ask them throughout the presentation. And on that note, I will pass it over to my esteemed colleague and friend, your presenter today, Uzair.
Thank you, Chris. So let's get started and let's understand how we can use design thinking in an enterprise setting to move from chaos to clarity. All right, so pretty much in most projects or most product, start of the products, we see a landscape like this. We are at the very high level. Somebody comes up with an idea on how to distinguish themselves in the market or how to launch a new product or how to enhance a new feature. And we are always starting at the fantasize phase, which is 10,000 feet level thinking, where it's all blue sky, hopes and ideas, and that things will work in the market. And then it gets passed over to the other team members to try to strategize, make sense of those ideas, make them more concrete, understand the what and why, and then move things forward. And then gradually it starts moving into the implementation phase, which we call render phase, in which things start becoming much more clearer, and we are closer to the ground, like 100 feet level granularity. Then it comes into a 10 feet level, which is concretized. Here we are implementing those products, features, and shipping them out into the market. So design thinking really helps us at the higher end of this picture, at the 10,000 feet and at the 1,000 feet level, in between, when we are trying to make sense of these ideas and trying to turn them into something more tangible, and again, moving from chaos to clarity. Quite often, we see at the 10,000 feet level, ideas are just passed on from the higher level to the lower team members in terms of for execution. But there's a lot of opportunity over there as well to challenge those ideas, to try to understand why are we doing something and why are we trying to take this initiative? What is the business value? What is the user value? And how would we materialize them? So let's take a deeper dive and understand how chaos looks like. So we have seen it over and over in our engagements with multiple enterprise clients. At the chaos stage, there's a lot of discussion on, are we doing the right thing? The problem statements are too broad, high level, and some people within the organization are championing them. And the requirements are based on assumptions. They're not clearly written down. Things are on whiteboards, sometimes napkins. And then the validation, again, people are asking these questions. Will it work? What certainty do we have? Have we tested it? Tech strategy is almost non-existent at this phase. It's still being discussed whether we can implement this, how long will it take, what back-end systems, what other systems are required. And the implementation is therefore in question. But as we move towards clarity, it becomes much more clear that yes, we are doing the right thing, and now let's go ahead and build it and ship it to the customers. So the problem statements at this phase are resolved. Everyone is on same page, ready to move forward. Um, they're targeted problem statements, and the requirements here are also well captured and documented. Prototype concept is envisioned, and people stand behind it. They have agreed upon, yes, this is the right way forward. And validation. So in terms of business validation, we do have certain degree of certainty that yes, this product or feature makes sense. And from user point of view, we have gone through multiple iterations of that concept or feature set, and we know that what would work, hopefully, in the market. Tech strategy is now clearly defined. We know what would be the implementation, what would it take to build this thing in terms of time, budget, and resources. And the implementation plan becomes more tangible. So this is how we move from chaos to clarity. So quick question for everybody here in the audience. On a scale of 1 to 5, how clear are you about your current projects and business goals? All right, a little bit more responses are coming in. Interesting picture here. So a bit chaotic. Yeah, sounds about right. It would be a miracle and a dream come true if everyone is super clear about the business outcomes and the user goals all throughout the life cycle, right? And that's the entire goal of this whole thing. So let's also understand one thing, and I want to put it as a disclaimer that in today's discussion, our focus is in an enterprise world and not on the startups or not on product specific teams. And the reason is there are quite a bit of differences in an enterprise world from a startup world. In a startup, teams are agile, lean. There are not a lot of stakeholders involved. So you can pretty much go from idea to MVP in a fast manner and without involving too many people and getting hung up on getting people's consensus behind it. So you can pretty much launch features, test them out, and see what works or not. Whereas in an enterprise setting, there are a lot of stakeholders involved. If you have to go to user research, oftentimes you have to go through marketing teams or customer experience teams. If you have to build a product or system that interacts with an existing product or system, then you got to bring a whole bunch of stakeholders on board, right? So the complexity of an enterprise world makes things more challenging. And that is why rolling out features and MVPs faster in the market is difficult. So design thinking really helps us build consensus, get an agreement from different people on what is the right thing to do and what is the right approach to materializing it. So another quick just poll here. How do you see design thinking fitting in your organizations? Where is the function in terms of teams? Is it part of UX? Is it part of product? Do you guys do design sprints all the time? So if you can quickly poll for that. Almost 50%. Few more seconds. All right, so we have a wide range of people here. So it seems like there are few folks here who are doing design sprints all the time, and then few who are saying we do only workshops for complex challenges. And yeah, so it depends really on their organizational setup. Many organizations are designed in a way that the UX team, that the digital team is strong enough, and they take the responsibility of implementing design thinking frameworks within the organization. Whereas there are a few other organizations where product teams have taken on this responsibility really to move things forward using design thinking and facilitation. So long story short, in an enterprise world, there's a lot of complexity, there's a lot of rigor needed and there's a lot of teams involved. So that's why the enterprise implementation or the flavors we follow in an enterprise setting are a bit different from design sprints or how startups do it. So from our perspective, there are 5 steps that we see are very critical and essential to get things out of the door and in terms of the MVP. Roughly, they map into first phase being the discovery, so identifying and understanding the market needs and your users. And I'll step through each one of them in a bit detail in the coming slides. Second phase being reframing problems as opportunities and brainstorming solutions to solve them, making them tangible, getting consensus, validating those ideas, and then really deciding what features to include in the MVP or not and visualize them. And then finally define the rollout strategy and ship things out into the market to test them out. So some of the frameworks here that we have adapted over time are based out of our practice, and others we have also taken inspiration from Google Ventures, Design Sprint, AJ Smart, Nordcap, or Nordic design firm, Strategizer. You can see the rest of the names. So let's continue. How do we move forward from chaos to clarity? So first step essentially is to make sense of market and business goals. And what does it look like? I cannot stress enough how much alignment is needed around business goals. Time in and time out, we have seen the project starts off with a good understanding of the business goals, but as things move forward, things get lost into the translation. And in implementation phase, people are always questioning, why are we building this? Who are we building this for? So this should be a living document, and we should have consensus across the product teams, across the business functions on what are the business goals that we are trying to achieve through our product or through our MVP that we are trying to launch. Defining the future vision and long-term goals. I'll tell you why this is extremely important. Future goals are clear at a higher level of the management. VP directors are often very clear on where they want to steer their product roadmap towards, but the team members are often not very clear. And as we see later on in this presentation, if we don't have clarity on the long-term goals, then sort of we are missing the guardrail. If the team members have to make certain decisions during the implementation phase, it really helps them to know the long-term vision so that they can align and resolve any differences or any challenges they face during the implementation. Goes without saying, we are talking about user-centered design. So understanding your target market, understanding your personas is extremely important. And whatever tools, mechanisms we can use in an enterprise setting, the more better. User testing, doing focus groups, surveys, but most importantly, doing them in and out. Quite often we see this activity to be taken up at the start of the project or in like quarterly or annual basis, but this needs to be in and out. We should be in front of our customers more often. Clearly defining value proposition for our customers, defining the success criteria, and this ties in back to our business goals somehow. Defining the business goals and then clearly linking them up to success criteria for MVP. Doing competition research is a no-brainer, but what I would recommend here is doing competition research not only in your sector, but also in finding analogous inspiration from other verticals. For example, if you're building an e-commerce platform in a telco space, then really trying to find the best practices in e-commerce sector in general, but also, for example, financial sector, insurance sector, and bringing those ideas into your product lifecycle. Because users are not only shaped by your product, right? Their behaviors and attitudes are shaped by a lot of different other products that they see and interact with on a daily basis. And finally, getting the business model canvas filled out for your product, and it's a fantastic way to capture all the detail. I'll speak to that in a minute in a following section. So how do we achieve it? Again, like I said, in an enterprise world, bringing people together into a full day workshop is really, really challenging. So what we aim for is break it down into shorter workshops, which are 1.5 hours, 2 hours maximum, bringing the key stakeholders into those sessions. And then the teams can go on and complete the rest of the activities. And then later on, we can still keep involving the stakeholders into different phases. So we have to break down the design sprint concept into much more detail so that we can implement it into an enterprise setting. So typically we do discovery sessions at the start of the project, which really helps us to set the context. So lightning talks is a great way for the product owners and the key stakeholders to bring in the context for the participants in a TED talk style. So really 5 to 10 minutes, filling them in the key critical concepts. Doing empathy maps, system diagrams, understanding the stakeholders, and then quickly voting out for potential solutions and how to test them out going forward. So this session really can be done in an hour or hour and a half maximum, depending on the complexity of the problem. Another great format we have found out, and this is an inspiration from Design Sprint Academy, is the problem framing. So if we are dealing with a complex problem, not a day-to-day thing, what we see in an enterprise setting is people come and approach that problem from different angles and lens. Somebody from marketing would have a different frame of reference on defining the problem. Somebody from technical team may think of this as a more of a technical challenge. People from customer experience team may have a different expectation. So bringing them all together into a workshop so that we ask them to individually first brainstorm, understand the business context, understand who is affected, what have you tried so far and what has worked or not, and quickly defining the goal, and then really writing down the problem statement from each party's perspective. What helps is it gets people to see from others' point of view. And then as a group, we work together towards a problem statement, which is representative and makes sense from all perspectives. We have done this workshop over and over, and we have seen this great results. One interesting insight I'll bring to the table is in the recent engagement, we did this with executives and the team members. What we saw is when we do this abstraction laddering, on the left side you can see, so the problem statement was defined by the leaders at a very abstract level. And the team members had the problem statement at a very concrete level, more like tactical level. So that sparked a lot of interesting conversation that the executives were thinking, we have made this thing very clear to you how to implement it, but at the same time, the problem statement was not very actionable. It was very high level. And then the following conversation happened, and then we were able to move it forward into the right degree of abstraction so that the team members can start driving it forward. Then we talked about setting the future vision, right? Some of the future workshops we do, which are sometimes part of the product discussion, or sometimes if we are on a complex, large-scale transformation project, which is multi-year and quite difficult, we do a future workshop separately as a standalone activity. Bringing in your stakeholder knowledge, doing a quick empathy map. If you should have journey maps already, you should bring them in, or if not, we can do a quick activity on understanding what we are trying to solve. And then really brainstorming, ideating on the future roadmaps. Another quick format that I would like to share with you, which we found very useful, is this framework by Nordcap. It's a futures activity. So asking everyone to write the future statement. So for example, in 2022, we will grab 10% market share in XYZ sector because we are making ABC changes to the product. So this is the aspiration that every team member comes together and writes a future statement. And then 5-star futures is a fantastic way. We found it creates a lot of alignment in the team in terms of what to expect in the MVP and the future roadmap. So what you do here is you define what does a 5-star future look like, which is like an ideal outcome, best in class feature set that you could imagine for this thing or this product to have. What are we building? Why are we doing it? For who we are doing it? And what does success look like? And you map it back to 1-star and then 3-star, 2-star. What is interesting to mention here is when the team members do this individually, they put down their aspirations or their viewpoint. And we have done it multiple times. What we saw is, so for example, if you're implementing an e-commerce feature and you want to do single sign-on, and the product manager thinks that should be just minimum 1-star, basically saying that I want it absolutely without question. But let's say a tech lead puts it at level 3. So now what happens after the individual activity is a group discussion. Why do you think this is featured at number 3? And then the tech lead would bring up that, well, this has a dependence on a backend system or a shared service from the other team. And their roadmap is indicating that we would get this at least in 4 months, right? So for me, we cannot achieve it as a bare minimum. So we have to have it as level 3. So after the activity, we were able to get a 5-star future alignment. So the team agreed on what is the minimum feature set and what is like a 5-star future. What does it look like? And this serves as a North Star. So in 2 months, we will achieve this. In 3 months, 1 year, it sort of gives you a high level roadmap, and we get consensus from team members. So great activity. And then moving on to, we talked about value proposition and business model canvas. So value proposition, really understanding what are the customer jobs, what are customers trying to achieve by hiring our product. So the concept is very wide. It's probably a topic for a separate session, but really what it boils down to is why should the customer pay for your product or service? What job are they trying to accomplish through it? What are some of the pains that they face in achieving or doing that job, and what are some gains? So this is the customer picture on the right side, and then we map it to the product side. Like what gain creators have we introduced as features in our product? What pain relievers do we have? And then finding and identifying the gaps. And then business model canvas really helps you define the customer segments. What is the value proposition for them? How do we reach them? What is the revenue model? How will we monetize this thing? What is the cost structure roughly, and what resources and partnerships and key activities we need? This can be a one-pager spec that we can enforce in our organizations for any initiative that we take or any product that we build. This document can provide a lot of context for people down the road who are implementing it. They can always revisit that this is what we imagined at the start of the project, and sort of making this as a living document. All right, so let's summarize. By the end of the phase 1, which should not take too long, by the way, it's just a matter of how complex is the product and how many teams are involved in this discussion. So we should have our user persona, target segmentation, vision, and objectives clarified, high-level feature set, map, roadmap, again, in forms of the 5-star futures, clearly defined value proposition, some competition benchmarking, and a business model.
And to slightly interrupt here, we have a few questions that have come in, and I think this is a great opportunity to field a few of them. First up, and something that I think you already kind of touched on a little bit, but perhaps you'd want to add a bit more to, is how do you define value proposition during the identification of market and business needs?
So, sorry, can you repeat that one more time?
How do you define value proposition during the identification of market and business needs?
Yeah, so really understanding the stakeholders first, who is involved and what is the value for them in this product offering that we are building. That is key, very critical. So if I go back, one of the activities here mentioning is system actors, for example. So in one of the workshop we did was clearly dig deeper into how many parties are involved here. So for example, this was a health safety application. So we identified who are the core users, who are the primary, who are the secondary. And in terms of system actors, who are the decision makers, who are the change makers, who are the stakeholders, and what's in it for them. For example, if you're selling your product to a factory in terms of health and safety, who is there to make the buying decision? What is important for them? And then dialing it back to the end customer or end user of that product. So value proposition has to be defined for each level, each stakeholder, and what sort of problem and pain point we are defining for them. Also helps to prioritize clearly through user research and sometimes user testing, what was the significance of that problem for them. We may think in our boardrooms or in our offices that that's a significant problem to be solved, and we will probably make a ton of money by making feature sets for them. But if we quickly do user testing, we will be able to find out whether that was a huge problem, whether they would pay for it. So following these techniques of testing early and often, we can establish business value proposition for our customers.
Wonderful. Okay, another one has come in. How do you do the reality check, i.e. bring outside in perspectives?
Yeah, great question. So outside in design thinking so funny thing is that we see the model of 5-step design thinking process and quite often, right? Understand, empathize, define, ideate, prototype, test, which paints a picture that it's a linear process. It is really not. It's an iterative process. And at the start of the project, which we're talking about here, discovery phase, if we are not clear about, let's say we as a group think that this is the problem, it's worth checking if this is a huge investment before moving to next phase, going back to the customers by making quick prototypes and testing it out whether that is a real problem. So bringing the voice of the customer early and upfront is extremely important. And then later on, as we are moving and resolving it, again, going back to the customer to user test it. So I'll address this point a little bit more in the next steps as we come along. I think hopefully it will become more clear.
Perfect. And we have quite a few more questions coming in, but for the sake of time, I'm going to save those for the end, and hopefully we can carry on and cover them all. But I will allow you to get back to your presentation. Thank you.
Sounds good. Perfect. So first phase, again, a reminder, was about understanding deeply the customer context and the business needs. So moving on from here, second phase is, by this phase, we should have our journeys, right? So it's time to dig deeper into your journey maps, map out the actions that the user is doing at each stage, understand the pain points on each step that they face, what frustrations they have to see, and what can be few gains that we can create for them. Once we take this holistic picture, we have an opportunity of framing those problems as how might be statements or as design challenges that we can solve. So some visual examples of this. For example, this is an example of a journey map. So you can see in the entire spectrum of the journey, you could find ideas or solutions that can provide gains for the customer. So bringing them into an opportunity assessment matrix, then doing quick voting, and then prioritization on them to see which ones are the best in terms of user outcome and business outcome. So these quick activities help you frame problems as opportunities and generate some solutions for them. Again, ideation sessions could be called anytime in the product discovery or throughout the life cycle of the MVP. What helps again is keeping a sense of the journey map. So we clearly identify where we are solving the problem for, generating some ideas, storyboarding them so that we get a hang of what the solution looks like from every participant's perspective. So in step two, really, we should have detailed journey maps, opportunity statements, high-level solution ideas, and experience storyboards. So that moves a step forward in terms of clarity. So at this stage, now we step into making things more tangible. So mapping out in an enterprise setting. So in a startup world or in a specific product feature, you may have limited number of user flows, but in an enterprise setting, there are a lot of complexity and a lot of user flows involved. And this is typically a great area where business system analysts are best paired with designers to capture all that complexity. But I would argue that in this phase, in step three, we should not be going into the nitty gritty of each and every corner case or use case. We should rather be focusing on the happy path to understand if everything goes well, how will this thing look like? So if you tap on the home page, you select a certain options, you go through the menu, and here's your task panel looks like. So this gives people a sense of how the functionality performs and how this thing will work in a real world. It's not meant to give you the exact fidelity or exact user experience, but it's enough for you to make a decision. Because remember, we haven't decided yet what features should be shipping out. And quite often we see designers doing higher fidelity and spending a lot of time in coming up with these concepts even before we have decided the MVP, which frankly is an opportunity where we can save a lot of time and effort. So making your user journeys tangible, documenting them, and then now at a little bit higher fidelity, turning them into user flows. So getting the block frames ready. And again, you can see here, the screen is not resolved fully, but we are getting a sense of it in terms of block frames. So one more important distinguishing factor, and this is where service design comes into picture in an enterprise setting, is, like I mentioned, in an enterprise world, your customer interaction is not linked to one team or one department. Often many stakeholders are involved in servicing requests from the customer. So think about it this is the customer journey of a healthcare service where the customer is interacting with your website. There's a step involved in terms of customer registration before the portal gets going for them. And then from that point onwards, they're accessing the portal, getting notifications, confirming their appointments, and then so on and so forth, managing their entire appointment for the healthcare. what helps here is that we go dig deeper in terms of the interactions. So in this scenario, a crisis worker and a service worker is the frontline staff. Which channels are they interacting with the customer? How is the interaction in terms of interface? Um, and what stage do they get involved? Then we dig deeper into the back offices. Who are the other support team members who are really helping in terms of these customer interactions? What happens often is when we pass the customer information or context from one team to another. For example, we are passing from the contact center to the backstage worker. This is where things break down. And our organizations are designed in a way that we design for process for our department. And then we toss the thing over to the next department to take care of it. What it does is it creates breakages in the customer journey. So service blueprint is a great way to always keep the customer in view. And like Chris, you were asking about outside in view. So the outside view was the touch point of the customer. Now you're mapping your back end processes so that you can serve the customer and aligning all the back end processes and systems in view of that interaction with the customer. Similarly, you could have support teams at the background in terms of IT, in terms of back end systems. Another interesting thing I'll mention here in terms of service blueprint is this blueprint also provides an opportunity for us to really take a look and design our systems from front end or user experience perspective inside. So we can design microservice architecture in a way that, okay, in the receive appointment functionality or feature set of the flow, these are the interactions that are involved in backend systems, and these are the users who are involved. How do we design the backend microservice architecture to serve the customer in the best possible manner in this stage of the interaction? All right, so now we have user flows, we have service blueprint, and we have high-level block frames. Now is the time that we go into decide and visualize phase. So moving on into the visualization, by this point, we should have a backlog of high-level features and user stories, not to the detail of user stories, but more like in terms of epics. So then here's an opportunity to bring the stakeholders back and do feature prioritization in terms of, yes, this feature has the maximum user value and business value. This is where the feature lies in context of the story. So in terms of the user interaction, so shop, decide, checkout, satisfaction, and then really honing down and trying to remove things that are not necessary. Unfortunately, in enterprise settings, MVPs are often driven by time, and we get questions on what can we do in 6 months' time. Rather, the question should be, what is the minimum time required to get this thing shipped to the customer so we can collect user feedback and we can continuously improve our product. So with that in mind, we can identify which are the key features for example, your browse or shop page, and what are the ones that we can park into the next phase. So following this rigorously helps us prioritize. And few examples of prioritization. Once we have prioritization then done, and for the prioritization features, now is the time to get the high fidelity mockups and really linking them into click-through prototypes. So now we can take them to user testing and get user feedback and also validate them from the business stakeholders. All right, so now that we are handing over things to implementation, this is the great cliff as we see more often in the market. Often the outside firms that are involved in terms of experience design or in terms of digital consulting firms, their journey ends here. But this is not the end of the product or MVP, right? It still has to go through implementation and out to the market. So what we can argue is design thinking is only as much effective in delivering results as it is in passing on the user context and empathy to the implementation team. Let me zoom in a little bit more on this. What we see often is the UX teams are passing on, they do the design documentation and they do the design specifications. But what gets missed out is the customer outcomes. We do not document them well, or we do not document the customer context. Design principles is also a great way that helps the designers. Really, it's meant for the designers from design thinking perspective to design the product which serves the customer outcomes. But I will explain that in a second, that how it really helps the implementation teams as well. And then the rationale. So often we made certain decision in the design phase, but now that we are into the implementation, teams are wrestling with the technical complexities, and they want to know, why did we decide to do certain route versus the other? And if we don't have good rationale captured, we would keep running into and the argument would be, well, business approved it this way. So that's a great opportunity for improvement. So quick poll here. How confident do you guys feel in your handoff process on a scale of 1 to 5, 5 being super confident? All right, a few more seconds. All right, so it's on the spectrum, so mostly neutral, and then some confident, some not very confident. It's interesting not getting any response on very confident. Okay, so I talked about design principles. So consider this as an example. These design principles were made for a product that we were building for brokers for a mortgage problem space. I'll not go into details of every single one, but you can see on the right-hand side, for example, the input preference. So what we did as a design team is, so we do a lot of customer research, right? But developers and the implementation team does not have the time to go through each and every persona and journey map and understand those things that the design team have worked on. So their ask was, can you simplify it for us? Give us some guardrails so that we can work off. So we found it as a great opportunity to share the design principles with them. One of them was input preference. So our user is a mortgage broker and fairly educated and prefers a compact user interface and prefers shortcuts because they want to be in and out of the system very quickly. And I'll explain how this helped us make user-centered decisions in a bit. Then really design documentation in terms of design systems. Again, this is a topic that we can explore in a separate webinar session, but higher level, in terms of documentation, what we found very useful is we have a lot of different team members. So we have marketing team, we have the digital or the user experience team members, we have the system analysts, and then we have developers, and on the tail end, we have the quality assurance guys. All of them are strangely working in their functions and using their versions of the tools. So designers are, let's say, working off Figma, and the system analysts are capturing all the details in Confluence. And similarly, developers are working off Jira. So all these tools and the information is fragmented across the tools. So there's a great opportunity to link them. In one of the recent projects we tried out, and it was really, really helpful for us, is linking the screen, for example, on Figma to the Confluence user story related to it. Similarly, linking the user story to the Jira tickets that the developers are working off. And the links should be so seamless that a designer should be able to track from the screen to the development user stories that the developers are working on, and vice versa. So coming back to the example of how sharing the design principles helped. So again, the application we were designing were dashboards. And the design principle was clear that the person we are making it for is a broker, and they're used to numbers and quickly looking at the screens and dashboards. So our developer came back and said, well, based on this design principle, I think we should make a improvement that the font that we are using, you have specified us to use proportional font. What it does is it spaces up the font based on the letter. So the proposition was we should use monospace font. So what it does is it spaces out all the digits neatly in terms of commas. So it doesn't matter if it's a 1 or 8, all the numbers are visually aligned. So it helped the team members make user-centered decisions in the project by following these principles. Making all these documents visual is a great way to go. Putting them onto boards, into your rooms, into your dashboards, so that everyone is looking at the user persona or the journey that we are working off, or what are the design principles, keeping them alive, living documents, and always available so that you can walk through all the stakeholders is really helpful. All right, so let's summarize. We have the MVP feature list. We have prioritized them. We have developed the high fidelity mockups of the features that we want to implement for the MVP phase. We user test them. also verify with the stakeholders, and then we hand it off to the developers. So with this, we are at the tail end. Before the release, we just need to do the release rollout strategy planning. The purpose of the MVP was really to test the product features. So doing the technical planning, so that how do we roll it out across to the market in terms of different environments, doing the content planning, marketing, and feedback. So building in the analytics so that we know what worked, what did not work, tying it back to our success criteria. So towards the end, we should have the market-ready implementation plan of MVP, MVP rollout strategy, and a build mechanism to build and measure feedback so that we can iterate on it. So with this, we conclude our presentation, and now it's open, the floor is open for questions.
Thank you very much, Uzair. And we actually have quite a few questions. So I will just let you know in the interest of time for how you want to give your answers. But we will just kind of start from the beginning. So who should be leading the design thinking activities within an organization?
Yeah, that's an interesting question. Like we talked about a little bit before, it really depends on the organization maturity in terms of design thinking, whether the organization stands behind the business value, they have seen it, implemented it, and found it to be useful. Sometimes what we see, at least in the telco space, is it's a function cross collaboration between the UX team and the product teams. Whereas in product companies or startups, we see it parked closer to the product function. So it really depends on the organization structure. But I would argue that experience design is a shared responsibility of all functions. So bringing everyone together and really setting up champions within each team member for design thinking is a great way to go.
Okay, perfect. Up next, we have, how can product owners benefit from design thinking?
Yeah, so product owners, like we talked about in an enterprise setting, building consensus is really important for a product, right? So product owners can keep track of all these artifacts. So for example, we talked about the business model canvas. We talked about the success criteria, right? So now let's say we move into the implementation phase and there's a conflict that different stakeholders are not happy with the progress, or they have concerns about the implementation in a certain way. So product owners can take this as an opportunity to revisit the product goals, revisit the objectives, and create a quick alignment session. So these are very helpful and powerful ways to use and remind our team members that these are the customer outcomes that we are targeting. This is the business goal that we are looking for. So let's figure out a way together to solve this challenge. Whether, let's say, prioritizing this challenge or removing this feature set from the MVP, does it majorly impact our user goal or not? All these discussions we can have using these sessions.
Up next, we have, workshops are typically short in terms of time. How do I have confidence that the outcome is what can be relied upon?
Yeah, so I think it all boils down to, like I talked about, the maturity first, and the facilitation is really important. So how accomplished and experienced is the facilitator? We see in the market, there are a lot of ready-made templates and formats in terms of workshops. But in an enterprise setting, a ready-made template may not get you the desired results. So if the facilitator is strong, they can really plan for the workshop in a way that they can work backwards on, okay, I hope to get XYZ outcome from this workshop. So what are the best activities that I can introduce in interest of time to move us from point A to point B, so we can move closer to a decision or a resolution? So I would argue facilitation is really important. And again, as organization practices design thinking, team members get exposed to it, they start adopting design thinking methods and tools, and they can greatly benefit from it.
Okay, this is a very, I think, relevant and topical question. Considering the pandemic forced remote working of teams, how do you customize these team workshops in the current context?
So in terms of pandemic, I think this is a very great great time for designers, in my opinion, because often we come across in an enterprise setting, we are targeting certain set of customers or certain user personas, and those personas don't change overnight. Yes, customer behaviors do change over, let's say, months and years, and new things come in market, and we have to always be on top of our game to release features and products for them. But in terms of this pandemic, what we are seeing in the market is rapid change of customer behavior. So I would argue that this is probably one of the greatest times for user experience designers to understand, to help their organizations understand the customers better, keep a keep a pulse on how behaviors have changed, and how can we innovate and implement new products and features within our offering, or even reinvent our business models to go to market and serve the needs of the customers. Many times the offerings or products or channels that we had might have been disrupted, right? So again, we can take this crisis as an opportunity to reset, reflect, and rethink our business model and go to market using design thinking.
Perfect. This is a short question, but I'm not too sure if the answer will be short. How often should design sprints be conducted?
There's no right and wrong answer to how often should design sprints be conducted. Again, depends on the context. Since today's focus was on enterprise setting, the challenge is not how often should we do it, because more we do it, faster we can move things. It's probably a function of how often can we find the stakeholders, because many times senior directors or VPs are working cross-functional. They're in charge of many projects at a given time. So bringing them together is often a challenge. But let's say on a team basis, anytime we hit a challenge that we think we need to do some certain brainstorming, we need to do certain alignment, we can do design thinking sessions.
Okay. Up next, we have how different is design thinking from lean startup and agile?
All right. This is a very interesting question. What we observe is there are a lot of concepts and frameworks in the market, and interestingly, they're originating from different fields. For example, I'll share an example here that service design is a concept which is very popular and championed more in Europe, whereas UX is a concept which is more coming from computer science backgrounds and technology companies. And similarly, we observe lean startup coming from startup world. Agile is a very mature process in terms that there's certifications and there's wide enterprise adoption for it. So while they seem different, but a lot of their concepts and underlying implications are similar. For example, the intent of lean startup model is to ship things out into the customer hand and learn from the customer, iterate and get feedback. And it lines up with the concept of design thinking as well, really, that before going to market, before building the thing, we have to test it with a lower fidelity. In terms of agile, again, the philosophy and mindset is how do we ship things faster into the market. So I have a visual here, which I can quickly show you. I think that would really help make sense of this, how things look like. So in terms of so for example, if we are dealing at the start of the problem space, we are exploring what is the customer problem fit. So is this the right problem for our customer to be solved? For example, post-pandemic scenario we talked about, right? So now the customer context has changed, but what is the right problem we as an organization should be solving for them? This is the problem space, and using design thinking here is a great fit. So we can really go through, empathize, define, ideate, and prototype. And then there's an overlap with the lean startup model where we are testing for problem solution fit. Well, we have a solution in mind, but is this the right solution to solve this problem? So this is how we can quickly make prototypes and test it out in the market. And then in the execution phase where we see agile really contributing significantly in terms that we quickly build that product, release it to the actual customers in the field, and then testing it out and learning from it, and then constantly iterating and improving it. Again, this visual sounds like it's linear. Things are not that linear, but like any model or any visual, things are always oversimplified, right? So take it with a grain of salt, but roughly in the problem space, design thinking has a great role to play. And like I said, all of them, these frameworks have a lot of overlap. So understanding their essence and implementing it accordingly helps.
Perfect. Up next, we have the participants of a workshop have varying experience levels and exposure, and it is very difficult to bring them to the same level of strategic thinking. Have you experienced this, and how do you handle it?
Yeah, this happens all the time, right? Many times people would come in who have probably not been exposed to design thinking. So for example, in a design workshop, the first thing we bring to the picture is no ranks on your shoulders, right? You may be a VP or you may be a director, but in the workshop purposes, you are a participant. So don't bring your authority into the discussion. It's really a collaborative process that we need to follow. But if people are not trained, not exposed, they tend to move into the workshop just like they would in a meeting. So as we do more of these workshops, I think this conundrum gets resolved. We see people embracing it and learning those behaviors. One thing I've learned as a practice lead is often us designers are taught to quantify the business value and really go to our stakeholders and explain to them that this is how design thinking works, or it has generated XYZ revenue for ABC company. Probably not the right approach. What we should be doing is, as a designer, come up with a minimum viable problem that we can help solve for our organization through design thinking and show the value in context of our organization. Let's say this meeting used to have 15 participants. We used to spend an hour. This is how we used to run this meeting. And now we took a different approach towards managing this meeting. And we see we are able to increase the output of the meeting by 50%, let's say, or we are able to generate twice more ideas in the same amount of time. Quantifying it in lean experiments. It could just be you would change the format of a meeting and turn it into a collaborative meeting. You see the results. So once people see the results, they start believing in it. And then you have to build I would say, a ramp up for people. So expose them to more training workshops, doing them in teaching them design thinking and teaching them while working on a real problem that is relevant to them. I think with this, we can improve the organizational maturity of design thinking. Chris, I would like to mention here very quickly, not for marketing, but for learning purposes, that we did this at our organization at Mobile Live recently, that across the team, we were trying to build our organizational maturity in design thinking. So we exposed 20% of our workforce on design thinking trainings. And we measured their attitude towards design thinking before the trainings and after. And what we saw is on a scale of 1 to 5, people were generally on 2 or 3 in terms of their understanding of design thinking. But after the workshops, like few hours of training, not more, we saw the attitude shift from on a scale of 4 to 5. So people understood design thinking more, they were more welcoming, and they were willing to explore it more in the upcoming problems.
Perfect. That kind of, I think, might take care of the next question I had is how do you educate other teams in the company about this process and assess how they are following it? Is there anything you want to add towards that effect?
Yeah, so following part comes a bit later, but exposing, I would say, is something you can get going with. Like I said, pick a small experiment in your team, demonstrate value. As you see value, people will start adopting it. Another tip I would share here is sometimes people may have had different experiences with design thinking. It really depends on the facilitator and really depends on how those sessions were conducted before in your organization. People may have bad memories of them. If you keep reminding them of design thinking, they may have a negative connotation to it. So no need to have a larger than life perspective on this toolkit or framework. This is a methodology or ways of working. So let's focus on adopting those principles in our day-to-day life and day-to-day work. Another example I would share here is when we would do these design thinking sessions with tech leads or developers, this is really out of their comfort zone, right? They are like, what am I here? What am I working on? This sticky note business, I don't really like it. This design thinking does not work. Do not do these sessions and do not call me. So for them, we experimented by changing the format. Again, if they're not comfortable yet why don't we just turn the JAD session in terms of agile into a more collaborative session? Take it step by step. We don't have to call it design thinking session. Just it's a different way of doing things. It's a collaborative approach towards problem solving. So winning over your team, exposing more people outside your team members, applying it to real world projects, quantifying the results, I think we should be able to scale design thinking behaviors within the organization.
Okay, excellent. I got another one here. A lot of activities in design thinking seem to involve voting on a solution. In these instances, does every vote have equal weightage? Are decisions come by democratically?
Yeah, great question. I think it is really important in these sessions to establish who are the decision makers. So while the voting process is designed in a way for people to share their opinion, it's non-binding. And why it's kept that way is that the decision maker or the product owner has much more context of the product often than the other team members. So while the team members are voting for a certain solution or certain idea, they're sharing their understanding and their concept, whereas the product owner can take that as an input from this workshop and then decide accordingly. Often what it does is, let's say if the product owner does not decide to go with the majority vote and they think the other idea has more value, but they could still try out both ideas and test them out and see which one works better. So yes, it is designed to have a bit of democratic feel to it, lets people voice their opinion and feel heard, feels like they contributed towards a solution, and they all came together to the conclusion as a group. But yeah, the voting is absolutely non-binding. We have to establish the decision makers, and they get to exercise their choice.
Okay, I'm gonna ask, we actually seem to have had some questions kind of come in from the chat as well. So I'm gonna take a look at one of these here. Do we need to follow a pre-designed approach for the UX projects, or do we need to create from the start?
I'm a great believer of reuse and reduce waste. I think as organization matures, there's always an opportunity that us practitioners should adopt in a way. If we see certain functions, certain things done over and over, we should set up a framework or tool for it. For example, design principles, right? For a new problem, we don't need to come up with a new template of design principles every single time. But if you're seeing you're working on multiple products and design principles is something that you're adopting as an organization, just make a template and share it across the team members so that they can follow that template and fill it out. Similarly, success criteria, workshop templates or workshop process. We should not be reinventing. We should reuse as much as possible. So wherever you see an opportunity of things being repeated, it's always great to set them up as a process or as a template.
Okay, and I think we might have time for maybe two or three more questions. What stack tools would you suggest to use working remotely for design thinking sessions? Which I think is a very topical question today.
Yeah, seems like Mural and Miro are rocking the world, right? Ever since we went into remote work, we are all realizing that these sessions or these co-creative activities could have been done remotely as well. And there are a lot of companies in the world who are purely remote, right? And they get a lot of good stuff done. It's just the way organizations are designed in our world, we were always hesitant towards adopting them. So in our company, we have adopted Mural and we find it to be very useful, but equally important is like Miro is also a great tool, has a lot of great templates. You could do a lot of whiteboarding sessions in it. So I would definitely start by exploring these two tools.
Okay, and I'm going to ask this next question. I hope I'm not putting you in the spot with it, but do you have any statistics that support your approach?
So this approach is really, again, I would say not designed from scratch. It's based off the best practices we see in the market. And I'll give an example of IBM. Some of the frameworks that they have adopted, they have a lot of third-party validation of those frameworks and models. So I would highly recommend people to go and read the Forrester study done on IBM design thinking process, and it really sets things in perspective. So what the study revealed is that IBM was, for example, able to save up to 60% of time in terms of requirement gathering. They were able to reduce 30% of time in terms of defect resolution because they were able to get the requirements right first up. And a lot of other quantifiable business benefits. We talked about consensus. So the report extensively covers and shows how design thinking helps organizations build consensus, get on the same page. So yes, many of these tools and methods already have quantifiable, verifiable results in the market. And like any practitioner of a craft, you should always have feedback mechanisms built in. Let's say you try out a certain tool and it did not work out well, we should also apply a design thinking approach towards it and see where can we improve it for next time and how can we make it better. So we continuously do this across the board, and at this point, all the frameworks and all the approach that we have built is based off continuous iteration.
You have talked a lot about a variety of topics today. Can you help me understand what is an MVP from chaos to clarity?
So MVP concept is really the minimum feature set that we can implement to get the product out to the market. So I'll give you an example. Let's make it tangible. Let's say we are making an e-commerce website to buy mobile phones and select, for example, our data plan to go with it, right? So this journey involves many stages. So you're selecting a product, you're shopping it, comparing it, then you go into plan selection, then you go into shopping cart, then you have to configure the device. So in all these stages or the journey, how many features are there on each stage? Do we really need all of them at this stage? No, the MVP concept is really putting us in a habit, or I would say it's an approach to get things faster to the market. So boiling it down to what is the essential functionality that we need for this product to go out, and who defines essential? Essential is in terms of that without this, the user cannot check out, for example, or the user cannot complete the transaction. So some of those things would be foundational and table stakes, but other things we can do away with. For example, you are picking a mobile phone and you're comparing it, and you want to read product reviews about it. So product reviews is a nice feature. Crowdsource a lot of data from third-party YouTubers or people who are doing product reviews in and out. But can you ship the product and can the customer complete the functionality without it? Yes. So let's ship this product out to the market and see that we had an objective. And the objective at the first place was because of pandemic situation, customers are not coming to stores. So let's provide them with a digital way so that they can complete the purchase. So we made this investment. Customers are adopting it. They're making certain purchases. We are seeing XYZ results of the business. Once we see the results, then you can continue and iterate and improve on the product features. So that's the concept of MVP.
Okay, and I think the final question, which I think is a very appropriate one, is the presentation more or less took us from start all the way up until rollout. What's next after rollout?
Yeah, so like we talked about, the concept of MVP is not once and done, right? It's not fire and forget. The whole purpose of it was all these great ideas that we have at the 10,000 feet in our boardrooms, in our discovery sessions, in our design thinking sessions. They're meaningless unless and until they go into the hands of the customer and we see tangible business outcomes. So once we see results, then now is the time to reflect. How did we do? What were the assumptions that we made? Did those assumptions hold out in the market? Are the customers adopting it? Are we seeing traction? All these parameters or success criteria that we set up. So based on that, we can make a decision. No, this product idea was not the right one. So let's shelve it. Or yeah, we kind of tried out. It didn't work out as we expected, but hey, we learned a ton of other stuff. So what if we change the direction and we pivot and introduce ABC feature? I think that would make the product results more tangible for the business. So either you're shelving it, you're pivoting, or you're accelerating your investment into the product going forward. And then you follow the same process. So you go into the next iteration. So first MVP, second MVP, it continues. It's a constant evolution of the product.
Okay, actually, you know what? I think we've got time for one more question. People in what roles would be well versed with design thinking concepts in order to gain the maximum benefits? So I think it's the question is kind of which people in what positions within the organization would be kind of ideal for it.
Yeah, what I would say is a great starting point is people who are close to the customers. They are the ones who can immediately see the benefits of it in terms of they bring in the voice of the customer into the organization. So this could be really a customer experience team, a digital team, or the product owners working closely with, let's say, UX researchers. So and again, this should not be the be and end all. The design thinking function can be housed under product or UX in close collaboration, but we should have design thinking champions within each function so that those functions can start adopting this methodology and collaborative approach. So there could be a center of excellence, and then there could be change champions. Let's say we pick some tech leads and train them into design thinking as well, so they can start using those facilitation techniques in their sessions. Similarly, across the board in project managers. So getting change champions is a great way to make an impact within the organization.
Perfect. I think that's about all we can handle for Q&A today, but we do have quite a few more. And on that note, that actually just concludes our webinar. I wanted to thank everybody for taking the time out of their day for joining us. I really hope you enjoyed the event. As a friendly reminder, we will be sending out a recording of this presentation to everyone who registered. So in the event that you feel like you missed something, don't worry. And we did have an overwhelming response of questions. So if we did not, unfortunately, get a chance to answer your question, when we send out the recording, please reply to that email and someone from our end will be more than happy to answer your question. Lastly, if you enjoyed today's event, we have another upcoming webinar where we will be unpacking the business models and all the possibilities surrounding the experiences we can create in the 5G future that is just around the corner. If you're interested in that, take a look at any of our socials and Eventbrite. We try and make registration as easy as possible for you. So on that note, thank you once again for everybody for joining us. Thank you, Uzair, for presenting, and I hope everybody has an absolutely wonderful day.
Thank you.